Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to our Working Together series live with Rabbi Karmi Ingber, and we're being hosted from the Netiv Center in Houston, Texas by Rod Bryant. It's always a joy. We've been learning Nehemiah, and it's very, very, very interesting stuff. I'm not sure where Rabbi Ingber is going to take it today, but I'm sure it's going to be great. So make sure you like the video out there, or feel free to share it on social media. So let's just jump right in and say hello to Rabbi.
Okay, hello everybody, and welcome. Good to see you all. I guess we're a smaller class. People, I guess, are away for 4th of July, I'm assuming. But hopefully they'll hear the recordings. And yeah, and interesting. We are continuing with the book of Nehemiah, and we're in chapter 5. Like I said, I picked this. One of the reasons I picked this sefer, this book to learn, as I said, is you see a lot of the machinations of different things, because as opposed to things in the Torah, we see more miraculous. This has to come under the guise of the world of nature. So let's continue and see some of the stories that are going on, some of the political machinations in Nehemiah that he's got to deal with, and hopefully guide through our own machinations in the world that we live in today. So chapter 5. Now what happened was, again, the Jews came back to Israel. Now you just got to get the picture here, because when the temple was destroyed, so the Jews were all exiled first to Babylon, and the place was literally destroyed. Same thing in the beginning of the second temple also. The second temple was destroyed. The place was barren. As you've all, I'm sure, heard the famous statement by Mark Twain in the 1800s, when he went to Israel and he saw this barren land, and he couldn't believe it, and his pictures of it. And that's why the whole story that the Arabs were saying, oh, we were there the whole time, was all nonsense, because what happened was God set it up that the land would not give its produce only to the Jewish people. So when the Jews were exiled, the land was essentially barren, in many places very, very barren. It's the one statement that says in the Talmud that a bird didn't fly over the land of Israel for 52 years. So you really had a barren place for a while. So now the Jews are coming back, but things were very difficult. Similarly to when the Jews came back in the recent times, people think the state of Israel started in 1948. That's not correct. It's not correct. In the 1800s, the Jewish people always had some people staying there. There's a synagogue I used to pray in the old city called the Ramban Nachmanides synagogue. That was established by Nachmanides in the 1300, I believe it was. No, 1400s. I think. And what happened was, Nachmanides was living in Spain. He was invited by the king of Spain to a debate. There was a student of Nachmanides called Pablo Cristiani, who was a heretical Jew, who said he could beat Nachmanides in a debate. Nachmanides asked the King Ferdinand for permission to speak freely, which the Jews never had rights to speak freely in a debate, because that kind of hampers your ability to win a debate, because you can't say anything that would be called heretical. So he asked for freedom to speak clearly and freely, and the king gave it to him. And so Nachmanides won the debate. And it was he wiped the floor with this other guy, and he just proved it was ridiculous, everything he was saying. And what happened was, so they started to say that, oh, Nachmanides lost the debate. So Nachmanides wrote down all of the arguments of the debate to show it. We have the book today. It's called Sefer Vikuach, the book of the debate by Nachmanides, and has the debate. And as a reward for this, he got threatened with his life. He had to run away, and he ran to the land of Israel. They set up a synagogue there, and that was hundreds of years old. So there was always like a small Jewish presence. In the 1800s, the Jews started coming back to the land of Israel. There were two great rabbis at the time, the students of the Baal Shem Tov, the students of the Vilna Gaon, who were sent by their teachers to go reestablish the land of Israel. So just so you should know, historically, like political modern Zionism, which starts in the 1900s, the movement to return to the land of Israel was already happening very strong in the 1800s. There was there were a few wealthy Jews that were backing it, Moses Montefiore and Rothschild. They were backing return to Zion, and Jews were going there. And what happened was, in every town, my mother's town, she told me about this. Like, before the Holocaust, there were people in their town that would go live in the land of Israel, which was desolate, poor, and they would gather money for them in Europe and send money to them to live. And that was called the Yishuv Hayashan, the original settlement, coming back to the land in the 1800s. And the people had no money. There was no agriculture. It was desolate. The land started flourishing in the 1800s when some of the people who had some money, like Moses Montefiore and Baron Rothschild, they started setting up some industries in the land of Israel. By the way, and this is important to know just for politically, because the Arabs that came to the land of Israel, and this is well documented in the book called From Time Immemorial by Joan Peters. Joan Peters was hired by the Arabs to write their story, and she started researching it, and she changed her mind. She said, this is not correct. This is not what happened. And she wrote a book that said, this is all a political scam, and she wrote the real story. So you want to see the book, interesting book called From Time Immemorial. And she writes there that for every Jew that came down to the desolate land to reestablish it, for every Jew that came, 100 nomadic Arabs came from the different places to get some food and some work. So when the Jews started returning, that's when really Arabs started coming in, because there were not many of them living in Israel. They were nomadic. They were living in other places, Syria, Lebanon, and they would come into the land then, and that's how they would get work. That's similar in an introduction to chapter 5, because chapter 5, you got to see it in that context. You got to understand that they came back to the land of Israel, and there's very little food. The place was desolate. They had to rebuild it. And what happens is that now all of a sudden they're building the wall. Ezra came back and restarted, and they finished the temple. And then Ezra came and he established, all the strength of the people. But there were small cadre of people surrounded by enemies, and there's not a lot of money. So in chapter 5, the people under the yoke now, and they're working all the time to build the wall, because Nehemiah's mission was, we got to make our efforts to protect ourselves. So the people start crying out in chapter 5, and the people cried out, and they said, "Listen, we have no money for food." Okay, their lands were mortgaged. They had to borrow money, and they were in debt, and they couldn't make money because they're building the wall. Okay. Now, a couple of things I want to discuss here in the beginning of this, in the chapter 5, from verse 1 to basically till verse 6, where they talk about how bad things are. First of all, they say something that our children are being made into slaves. I just want to talk about that 1 second, to talk about what is the Jewish position, what's the Torah position on slavery? Understand that a little bit. What does this mean? Because it's important. So first of all, slavery is forbidden. Even though I have to explain to you what context when we're talking about slaves. So there's two different kinds of aspects of slavery in the world. What in America used to be called an indentured servant, which means you owed money and you worked to pay off your debt. The second thing is called a slave. That person owns the body as of the person. So that is forbidden. Just important to know that nations of the world cannot take another person and make him a slave and own his body. They could have him work for them, and similarly, a Jew cannot take another Jew to make him work for them as a slave. They own the body. That's forbidden. So that's important to know. There is an exception that you may have heard about called the Canaanite slave. And it's a very different phenomenon where a Jew would have a person that they elevated him spiritually. He actually was a Canaanite that can actually this, and you see the story with Moshe. When Moshe made the people, there were people who came to Joshua and to Moshe and said that they were from faraway nations. They wanted to come, and they were lying. And Joshua said he would not. They can come part of Jewish people, and he said it wasn't true. And he made them into Canaanite servants. So a Canaanite servant's a little different, because Canaanite servant is actually an elevation of status. They have laws as a Jew in many areas, and they go to the mikveh, and they become spiritually elevated. That's the only exception to what we're talking about of the idea of a slave. On the whole, the idea of owning a person is forbidden. Can't do it. Not only that is it forbidden, the Talmud says that if you go and Talmud recommends strongly against being an hourly worker. It calls an hourly worker job a slave to a slave. And sometimes we have to do it. But the Talmud does not like that approach for a human being. It's much better to be a contractor, that you are not owned, your time is not owned by anyone. Of course, that doesn't mean they own your body, but they still own your time. 9 to 5, you plug. Now, again, I understand people have to do this. I'm not telling a person to go quit their job. But I'm saying is that it's very important, the ability to have a person's freedom. And therefore, when it's talking about being slaves here, it cannot mean physical owned slaves. Rather, it's the concept of they were like had to work to the point where they own their time. That's simply what we have to say, because otherwise slavery as a concept is forbidden. You can't go and a non-Jew cannot make another non-Jew as a slave, and a Jew cannot make another Jew as a slave. There's the Canaanite slave is the exception of the spiritual elevation of the person, but otherwise what we're talking about is there is a phenomenon of something that a person could work for someone for a period of time as a financial obligation. And as I say, if you could avoid it, you could avoid having your time be owned by somebody else, do it. If you can't, you can't. But if you can set it up that you can trust in God and make your efforts and not lock in a certain amount of time, it's obviously ideal for a person's freedom, which is a good 4th of July message, I think, actually, right? Freedom. Freedom is a very, very valued commodity. I always tell you, people don't realize what freedom means, but freedom is crucial. A person has an obligation to become what they have to be in the world, and they have to have the wherewithal to do it. So if you're locked in a certain amount of time, then that time is you're not owned in that time. Even in Jewish law, it's amazing. Somebody who's an hourly laborer has special laws of saying prayers. They cannot take a long prayer. They cannot have, the grace after meals, and for a Jewish person is an obligation from the Torah. A non-Jew should also thank God and say blessings and for what they get, but it's an obligation from the Torah to say. But the law is that if you're an hourly worker, you can't go and say, "Oh, I'm going to be a really righteous guy," and say a long prayer for 3 hours. Can't do that. I'm a holy man, and normally I finish in 1 second. Now I'm working by the boss, and I punch the clock, and I have a religious obligation. They can't do that. And the law is a very concise prayer, he says. So that's the first thing about being free and importance. Now, the people complained they had no money. Now, in verse 6, Nehemiah was very upset. He was very upset about this when I heard the situation. And it says in verse 7, he called all the people who had money, who are the wealthier people, and he said, listen, the Jewish people who had become indentured servants, meaning that they were working by someone else who bought them for their labor, by the non-Jews, we had to go and redeem them. Because it's an obligation that it says in the Torah that if your brethren was sold someone else as an indentured servant, in the sense, again, in term I'm saying not as owned by as a slave, but you have to go and redeem him. So we did that, and now you're going to put them in the same situation. So now Nehemiah appeals to the people, but this is not the thing to do. And he says now in verse 10 that I am going to now give them money and the poor people money and food, and whatever they owe me, I'm going to cancel it. And I'm going to return to them their things that if you have a deposit, a mortgage on their property, I'm asking to return it to them. Okay? And so Nehemiah makes a plea to the wealthy people to help support the poor people. Okay? Now, he says afterwards, the people agree to this. Okay, the people agree. Okay. And Nashiv says, yes, we'll do it. Verse 12. And we're not going to ask them for their money back. Now, then it says, Nehemiah said, okay, I want to take a vow. Take a vow, and now he says, if you don't keep the vow, your money will be lost to you, and all of that. Now, I just want to talk about this 1 second, because this gets us to a topic that is a very important topic of charity. Charity, and about, what's the situation if a person doesn't have money? What are you supposed to do? What do you have to do? And it really is very relevant today, because we live in this world where people, and I talk about it a lot, but what's really happened is that the communist ideals of America, of other nations, have now seeped into America. So what is the attitude towards this? What is the attitude towards, okay, they have no money. Should you cancel their debt or not? Well, maybe, how does this work? Should you cancel student loans? Should you cancel, redistribute the wealth? What's the structure? So the answer is like this. I'm going to say it like this. First of all, are you able to hear me? Because it says that I'm trying to reconnect on the thing. You guys can hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. So first of all, the rule is that you cannot go and take someone else's money and give it to someone else. There is no such thing as a communism, as socialism. Every person has what they have. There is an obligation to give charity. There's a discussion in the Talmud, can you force the charity that person needs to give or not? Discussion. But simply put, you cannot. You cannot. The person is supposed to give charity. There were structures in Jewish systems where they used to, come to them and say, you have to give a charity, and they would push them. So charity, but charity is very different than the tax of redistribution of wealth. It's completely different. Charity works much better, actually, if you do it right. And it's very important, because the Jewish people have been very careful about this throughout the generations, where they really set up, like a free loan societies. They do different things to help people get themselves started. As I probably mentioned to you before, in terms of the levels of charity, the highest level is actually a loan, because then you give the person the ability to make their money and they keep their honor intact. Because they give you the money back and they turned it. That's the highest form. So to give someone a job, give someone a loan, but otherwise there is the obligations of giving charity. That is a commandment Torah, and it's a giant commandment. However, there's not such an idea of redistribution of wealth. That's insane. That's complete, as I mentioned last week, that is called an ignoramus. And at a certain level, it's actually stealing. My son once pointed out to me, if you look in the story of Joseph, I think I mentioned this one before, it says that Joseph bought the Egyptians as slaves, indentured servants, whatever you want to call it. And he took from Pharaoh 20% of the people's earnings, he took in taxes. Wow. At 20%, you're like, all right, what does the government take today? I mean, 20%, you're like, oh, okay, that's maybe not so bad. It's 30% and it's 50%. What? Yeah. Is the what threshold? Revolt. Oh, yeah. Where did you, what's that from, Dan? Where are those numbers from? Right. And then you could say, well, there's a smaller percentage of people that have more money, so we could take more from because they're too small to revolt. So you could also then say, let's just tax those people. Right. But the point is that that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is chesed, is kindness, because there is the idea that every person has what they have. They have their mission. They have their what their wealth is. But they have to take from theirs and give it as a statement of their own giving of charity. The reason why Nehemiah pushed them so much was because it was a time where that's what was needed. It was a time of famine. And therefore, he called on them to go beyond the letter of the law, what they normally would have done, and to give more charity because it was needed. It was time of famine. The people came back. They had to build the walls. All of these problems were such that the people now understood it wasn't that what they owned was not theirs. It was theirs. It wasn't Nehemiah coming and saying, you didn't earn this. He didn't say that. What he said was that this is a time where it is a time of the obligation to step up and to do chesed, do charity. And the people all accepted that. And that's why afterwards, the only curse he gave them is once they took a vow. Because if they wouldn't have done it, they wouldn't have done it. He couldn't force them to necessarily do all that. But the vow, once they took a vow and they were obligated. And so that's what happens here. So there is an important aspect of everyone has to understand that they have, they have this thing today. Some people are saying it's terrible, some people are saying it's great. The end of affirmative action in America, which I think is a great thing. That every person should be judged on their character, on the color of their skin, and a person should therefore, be able to have the abilities to go and to make what they make. Once you make something, we're not going to take it from you, but we ask that a person be kind and do the act of helping people who have less. And here there was certainly that need because the state of the world at the time in Israel and the need to build a wall and the Great Depression and great poverty they were in. And that's what happens. Okay, good. Questions, comments on what I just said so far? Rod, you're muted.
Okay, yeah, I'm just checking to see who Laura's coming back into the class. She was kicked out. Anybody have any questions or comments so far? None?
Okay.
Okay.
Good. So far, so good. And now I wanted to say the next line. In verse 13, after the people agree to this, it says, Vayomru kol kahal amen. Nehemiah made them take a vow, and they said, Amen, which means it's true, we will keep this vow. V'yahalu Hashem, they praise God. And the people did what they said. What was the praising of God for? So the commentaries say that once they felt that God put in their hearts to give the charity, they actually praised God for them promising the charity. And it's very important to understand that. When a person doesn't go and do something that's right, they feel bad. When you do an act that you feel is a righteous act, you actually start to feel good. The people's praise was because they now committed to give charity, and they understood once they committed to it, they felt this is the right thing. And they were able to part with their money in a very different way. Very important. I want to tell you one other thing on this point here. There's a law in the Torah that says to honor a wealthy person. Now, as a freedom-loving American, that seems to bother us. What? Why should I honor a person that's wealthy? Well, what does that mean? Because he has money, I should honor him? You have to understand what this means. It's very important. It means like this. It means when God gave somebody money, he gave it to them for a purpose. They have now the resources to make the world a better place. And that is now a mission they have. And that's why if they don't do it, they're punished, commiserate with the fact that they didn't do that. That's what people don't understand. Poverty is a test. Wealth is a test. Poverty is a test that you don't get negative, jealous, and steal. Wealth is a test you don't get haughty, and you don't not give, because when you don't give, then that person is going to get punished. That's what Nehemiah says. If you don't do this now, you're going to lose all your money. Because the reason to honor is not because you have money, it's because God put you in a position that you're supposed to make the world a better place. And if you do it, you get that honor. If you don't do it, you're a bad guy, and you get punished. It's not like a person says, "Oh, the guy has riches, so he just sits on them." No, he has to do something. He has to actually use them in a positive way in the world. Okay, good. Let's keep going. So now Nehemiah now says that from that day on, and the whole time he was the governor, he never took taxes from the people, and he needed to. That's how they got paid. So he's working for the people, but he doesn't take a salary. He won't collect the taxes that the government gives him. Okay, and Nehemiah says about himself, he starts feeding the people. In verse 17, he has 150 people, and from the Jewish people and from the nations of the world that came to also eat by him, that he's supporting. So he is actually now not only not lining his pockets as a leader, and this makes you wonder, how do some politicians become very rich? It's a fascinating thing. I think there's a Congress discussing that right now. How does that happen? So Nehemiah says, I'm not taking a nickel for this. That's really a servant to the people. I think I mentioned to you a couple of times, it's a fascinating thing. Like you see sometimes these preachers with the mega churches, and they're driving around in these like fancy cars. And I've been in the home of some of the greatest leaders of the Jewish people. I was in the home of Rabbi Yoshev Zatzal. Rabbi Yoshev once called people to come and to protest. They were going to dig up these graves, and this thing was very terrible. And he said, everyone go out and go to this. And it was a beautiful protest. People were sitting there and praying. He just said everyone should go out. 600,000 people went out just from his saying it. Now, if you can command that kind of power to get people to just almost over 500,000 people to go out on your say so, I mean, you could probably rack in the money too. He lived in this tiny little house, tiny apartment. It was like 2 rooms. It was fascinating. And that really has always been like that. Basically, if you look at very often the greatest leaders of the Jewish people who have the most power, they are doing what they're supposed to do. They're saying, I am here to go and to do God's mission, and they're not trying to line their pockets. And that's what Nehemiah says now. Nehemiah says that I am not going to take any money for what I'm doing. I'm going to help the people. That's what he does. Now, Nehemiah here, there's some words here that I mentioned to you once that the sages have a complaint against Nehemiah with. Even though Nehemiah is very righteous, remember, a righteous person is judged very, very exacting. It's not like, people think, oh, the guy's a saint, so we'll give him we'll give him slack. No, the more righteous the person, the more the Torah holds them in a higher obligation. The reason for that, I told you many times, is because when a righteous person is doing something, they don't want the system to be tainted by giving them chesed, kindness. They want to earn what they're doing. They want to be exact. They want to be precise. They want to be able to do everything right. Nehemiah here says two things that the sages have complaints against him. Even though he didn't mean it in a bad way, but didn't come out right. In the end of the chapter, in the end of the book also, he says, Hashem should remember what I've done. And on that, the sages say, some say, he didn't mean it that way. The Malbim says he meant it in a way that, remember what I'm doing should be a blessing for them. But when you say, remember all the good things I did, it doesn't sound right. It sounds like you're taking credit. Even the great Nehemiah is held accountable for that. Additionally, he says, and I'm not taking the taxes, and the previous governors did take it, but I'm not taking it. Sages say you shouldn't have said that either. Because, okay, you're doing a great thing, but don't take somebody else's calculation. I don't do this. Okay, you don't do this. So what do you tell us about other people? He didn't mean it in a bad way, God forbid. But the sages actually held him accountable. And a righteous person has to be very, very careful. So even the great Nehemiah, who's doing a great thing, had to be careful not to contrast it to other people and not to elevate yourself in any way. And it's very hard. It's very hard. We do something good, we want to feel, I did it. Amazing. It's very hard to be that person, to feel what I am doing is what I'm supposed to do. It's very hard. Because we all, and today especially, most people have low self-esteem. And so when you do something good, you what you want to do is you want to feel good about it. And so how do you? And it's a problem. How do you talk about humility when I feel bad about myself? And most people that are haughty are really not even haughty. They're really very low self-esteem, and they're trying to elevate themselves to make them feel better about themselves. So I always tell you, the answer is somewhat simple, but very hard to do. The answer is you could feel great about yourself because you are made in the image of Hashem. And therefore, you could feel you're the greatest person in the world because you are. But how did I get this way? Well, because God gave me this quality. He gave me certain skills. He gave me certain things. So that's why Moshe, as Moses becomes greater and greater, becomes more and more humble. It's fascinating. You would think the greater he becomes, the more haughty he becomes. But the greater he becomes, the more he understands what this is from God. So yes, feel great about yourself. You do something good, feel good that you did it. But don't separate yourself from your source. Because when you do that, then you have to say, and that's really this week's parsha of Bilam. It's amazing. Bilam, God talks to him, and he says, oh, God speaks to me, and it's the sages say it's fascinating when the first messengers come to Bilam. So Bilam says to God, Balak, the king, sent these people to me. And Rashi says what he was saying to God was, maybe I'm not important in your eyes, but I'm important in the king's eyes. That's the craziest thing I ever heard. You're a prophet. God's speaking to you. What is this obsession you have with your lowliness that God doesn't think you're anything, and you're trying to show off to God? It's insanity. It's like, what is he thinking? He's going to impress God that Bilam, Balak, the king, sent for me. And why does he think God hates him so much? He's talking to him. Wild. And the answer is because Bilam's approach is separating himself from God. He's called a kosen. He's called a sorcerer. Let me explain this a second. Very, very important. There's a law in the Torah. It says that the Jews are not allowed to go to sorcerers and tarot readers, and people will see the future. But God will give them a prophet, and he'll tell them what they need. So I don't understand. So fine. So we got a prophet, but if the idea is telling me the future, so why is it better hear the future from the prophet than to hear the future from the sorcerer? It says don't go in the book of Deuteronomy. It says don't go to the guys who tell you the future. Don't chase after it. I'll give you a prophet. He'll tell you what you need to know. He'll tell you the future. So is searching for the future good or bad? Well, it depends. Depends. The sorcerer's goal is to find out how the spiritual world works to force God's hand, because he's separate from God. Bilam's not about what does God want and I'm connected to God. His what can I get? How can I force God's hand to get what I want? That's the sorcerer. So the search for the future is a search for something that runs contrary to God. That's why he's doing it. It's about knowing how the system works to manipulate the system for his own intention. The prophet's not about telling you the prophet is now that you are connected to your source, you will know the things you need to know how to go forward, but not because you're trying to manipulate to get to what you want. It's an incredible, it's in the ethic of our Father. It says, make your will God's will, and then he'll make other people's will your will. Meaning that what's happening is that when you think I want something separate from my source, you're in danger zone. You're in danger zone because at that point, you got your own agenda. That's what Bilam was about. Yes, he was a prophet, but he felt he was so low in God's eyes because he knew he was competing. He wasn't trying to say, what's God's will? The prophet, that's what the prophet's trying to do. Understand what God wants. And when you understand what God wants, so yes, God will tell him, okay, so you need to know the future in certain cases to know what's going on. It's completely different objective, okay? And that's what we have to do. We have to feel good about ourselves, not because, oh yeah, this is who I am and I made myself. No. I feel good who I am because I was created in the image of God and I was given these qualities, I was given these skills, and therefore I must be beloved and I must be valuable and I must bring those out in what I'm about. And it's very beautiful then. Right? Makes sense? Okay, let's go on a little bit more. So I'm having a little sinus issues here. It's Dan, you guys in Canada got to stop with the fires, you know?
Always
yeah,
say,
we got the global village. You guys keep sending it down here, you know?
Yeah, I always say it's still the same land.
That's right. That's
right.
right.
You're telling us to take it up with him.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, it's humid. It's humid. But it's really, I mean, we got warnings about going outside. So
No, but it is coming down the East Coast, right?
The global village is an amazing concept, really. And what you But I don't say, isn't the fires on the East Coast? So you're doing good. Okay. Anyway, I'm not having a little trouble breathing these days, so excuse my sort of gasping here. Okay, let's go a little bit further. So now we are up to, that is chapter 5. Chapter 6. Chapter 6 brings us back into, and again, one of the reasons I learned this book with you, brings us into our world of global politics today. Because the good guy often does not look like the good guy. The bad guy is the guy who's calling you a crook, very often is the thief. And if you don't believe me, just look at the politics. It's quite amazing. And that's a statement from the sages. The sages say whoever disqualifies with their own iniquity. When you go and you say, the guy says, you're a thief, check him out. Could be they're a thief too. Or could be they're a thief and you're not, hopefully. But that's what's happened. So that's exactly what's happening in America. It's happening across the world with the situation. And it's no different in what's happening in Nehemiah. The guys who are looking like they are the righteous, holy people, have good intentions, are not. All right, let's see chapter 6. When the enemies of the Jews, Sanballat, Tovia, Geshem, and the other enemies saw that the wall was finished, they didn't put the gates on yet, but they had the walls finished. They started trying to create issues. Literally, like all the stories you see in politics, and they present it a certain way, and that's not what's happening. So they sent messages. The messages to Nehemiah. Listen, we got to meet. We need to have a summit. We want to help you. We want to help you. But Nehemiah understands that they're actually going to kill him. So Nehemiah does not trust these characters. And they keep saying, listen, we have to meet. There's stuff going on. And Nehemiah realizes that they're going to try to kill him. They send messages to him. He keeps pushing them off. He says, I can't. I'm busy. I'm building the wall now. I'm not available. Fine. Keep sending him messages. Send Sanballat, one of the enemies there, one of the leaders of the political parties that are in control there. Send another message. And he says now, it's gone out throughout the world, throughout the nations of the world, that the Jews are rebelling. They're rebelling against the king. And they're building the wall, and the word's out. And the word is that you're going to become the king. Okay? And there's even prophets. Now, here's a question, what's they mean? Prophets or people speaking, but the word is out that you are being proclaimed as the new king. And that may be a problem. Because you were sent by the king of Persia to be the governor, maybe, but now you're taking the king? Now let's get together, you and I, and we're going to, I'm going to try, and I'm going to try to help you. Okay? Because I know what's happening here. The word's going out. You're not, Nehemiah knows this politician is lying. He knows Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself. He knows all the other shenanigans are all a big lie. He sees right through it, and he says, no thanks. Okay? He says to him, listen, I'm not playing your game. Stuff is all made up. I'm not worried about it. Never happened. Never said it. Not engaging. Okay? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to push us away from our mission. And that's really what it is. And as I told you last week also about how to deal with the politics. Keep your mission in mind. Keep your mission and don't get stuck in their games. So you're trying to get us, off track. So we're gonna buy into your story. That's not it. So now what happened was Nehemiah gets a message from this guy called Shemaiah ben Dalia, who was an ascetic. He was a guy that was pretending to be a holy man. Okay? Pretending. Remember, there's still prophecy amongst the Jewish people. This guy is pretending to be a holy man. And he tells Nehemiah that, listen, I'm on your side. Your enemies are coming to kill you. You should go into the temple. There's no gates and the doors of the walls of the city. Go in the temple and lock it up and stay inside the temple. I'm going to kill you tonight. So Nehemiah says, listen, first of all, I'm not running away. Okay, I'm the leader of the people here, and I'm not going to go and hide. I'm not doing that. That's first of all. And second of all, you're sending me to go into the temple. I'm not a Cohen. I can't go to the temple. Now, this is a little tricky because Nehemiah understands this guy's a false prophet because he's telling him to do something that's forbidden. Now, the question is, if a prophet says something to do something that's forbidden, does that mean he's a false prophet? So there's two different categories. If a prophet comes along and says to change one of the Torah laws, that is a sign he is a false prophet. He must be killed. And I said many times, that's a verse in the Torah, and that kind of undoes a lot of religions. That's a pretty straight one. And the Torah says, I don't care what he does. The guy can do miracles. Doesn't matter. So even if he does phony miracles, but if he does real miracles, it doesn't make a difference. He says to do one thing against the Torah, you kill him, he's a false prophet. Now, there is an exception, though. A prophet that's a known prophet that says as a one-time thing to go for one moment to do something that's not in the Torah, it's an accepted prophet, that prophet you could listen to. Who is that? That's Elijah the prophet. Elijah the prophet had a showdown with Ahab, where they offered offerings on Mount Carmel. That was the temple. The law is you could only bring offerings in the temple. But Elijah the prophet knew he was told by God it's a one-time thing. He could do it. So if a prophet changes it forever, nullifies the law, he's a false prophet. If a prophet comes along and says one time, then he could possibly be a real prophet. But he has to be a known prophet. So this guy is not a known prophet. It's not clear he's an established prophet. And Nehemiah takes it as even a one-time thing. You're not an honest prophet. You're a false prophet. And so Nehemiah does not listen to him. That's verse 12. Nehemiah realizes it's not from Hashem, and he realizes that this guy has been bought. This guy is a politician, and he's bought. Amazing. Okay. And now Nehemiah getting praise, okay, to Hashem, to punish them for their lies. And Nehemiah finishes building the temple, the walls around the city, and he finishes building that. And when the people, the enemies of Israel, hear the temple, the wall has been finished to be built, their hearts melt because they realize that this is a major change. And it says they realize it's from Hashem, which is a fascinating thing to say, really, because this whole story of Nehemiah is happening through natural means. And so you wouldn't think these heretics would see that it was God's hand. But at the end, they realized, and they got afraid because they realized we did everything we tried and could to destroy him, and nothing worked. Okay? And at that time, there were many enemies of the Jewish people who were trying to go and they were politicians. These guys had connections, they had power, and they were trying to stop Nehemiah from his work and stop the Jewish people from rebuilding the walls and serving Hashem properly. and they were trying to stop them, but they were unsuccessful. And we're going to see next time in chapter 7, we're going to start seeing there at the completion of the gates of the city and the completion now, when Nehemiah gets them all back into a safe place in Jerusalem, and they're able to really establish now the second Commonwealth. Okay, questions, comments, thoughts on what we said?
Hi, Rabbi Dan here. You'd mentioned earlier about people have to keep an eye on their task. Is there any, say, tricks of the trade or something you could say to inspire when people are going through real dark tests? I mean, is there something they can do to keep the candle lit and the light in front of them? I don't know, but do you get the point? I mean, you had said that people need to keep focus on their task, and sometimes it can seem quite dark.
I'm gonna throw something out here, just not to answer your question right now, but something that Rod spoke to me about, and I've been debating it how to do it, but I may offer to do it for this group on an individual basis. But one of the things that I've been working on is I created this program called the 7 Mindsets, and what it does is takes Torah concepts, and it helps people to see the world through the Torah lens and really come to a self-development. The first 2 mindsets are the mindsets of purpose and individual mission. And what I do there is I really work in more of a counseling format with people to help a person figure out what their unique missions, their qualities are, and therefore what they're supposed to do. Okay, so it's an important process. So I mean, we'll talk with Rod, and maybe we'll make this available, this program, if people want to do it. I mean, it's an intense program. I do with certain techniques of using certain meditation, hypnotherapies, NLP, where a person gets to really contact themselves and figure out what it is that they should do. But in brief, right now, what I would say is every person needs to look at their qualities. You could do this 2 ways. You look at your challenges, look at your positive or your negative. Go with your positive right now. There are things that you have that are unique qualities. And therefore, every person has their general commandments. The Jews have their commandments. Nochites, the non-Jews have their commandments, the 7 commandments, and the extrapolation of them. But every person has some unique commandment, unique quality within that they have to do. It'll all be reflected in what your commandments are, but what is your thing? Are you a person that can do kindness? Are you a person that can create that? When you start to think about your qualities, you start the process of saying, what is it that I need to do in this world? Because everyone has a purpose that they could do that's unique to them. There is more general, which is for the people, but it's very specific of who you are, how you do the mitzvot. And then within that, there is your unique thing that what you should focus on. So the way to start that process is to go and to think about your qualities. See the world as is, and this if we do this program, I'll help people to work it through. But you see that there's a purpose in the world. The world's moving towards completion, towards perfection. What is that? We'll explain what that is. And then what role can I play that no one else could play because I have certain skills and certain unique combination of talents that allow me to bring that out. So I think every person has to do it on a global level. If a person is Jewish, a person is not Jewish. I have commandments, and those commandments are building the world. And then the trick is to look inside. What is it about me that is something that's unique that I'm going to contribute that makes the world a better place? And then you could see it as part of your global mission.
That's really good. I really hope that that's something that can be developed. To be honest with you, just about everybody who's been in this group for a while has discovered that Torah is the elixir to really managing all aspects of self-development and growth. But there are some people that come in, if you could actually mentor them through that process, it would be like they call it express lane to get there.
Yeah, I think honestly, even a person who is very knowledgeable in Torah and keeps the commandments, it's still a process to understand who am I? Like what is it about me that's different? You know, I see everyone doing these commandments. Well, when I do it, it's different.
Right.
When I make a blessing, it's me, and it's different than someone else. And therefore, based on that, it's true for mitzvot, and it's true for the unique aspect of what I could do in the world as a reflection of my quality in the doing of these mitzvot. So I think it's a process that it's certainly obviously in the Torah, because I'm not saying anything that's not in the Torah, but it doesn't mean that everyone knows how to access it. It's like the Muslim movement in the 1800s, when the rabbis, Salanter, stood up and started saying to work on your trades. That didn't start with him. It started from Torah. But sometimes people got out of the ability to really take the Torah and to apply it into their heart. So he showed you techniques to go and to feel what you were learning and to bring it out in your own world. And that you always need that, because the Torah is there, but you need the wisdom to understand it and understand how it applies to you.
You know, Rabbi, when you were doing the lecture, something came to mind during the transition, or at the time of the transition between Jehu and Jeroboam, that, you know, it seemed like that he needed to go clean up some mess, right? Clear out the idolatry, do this, do that. God commends him, and he's now giving the throne for, you know, another generation or whatever. But then yet verse 31 just stood out to me, and I still am processing this. Yet Jehu was not careful to keep the law of God, the God of Israel, with his own heart, with his whole heart. He did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, which he caused Israel to commit. Like,
right.
You understand? It's like that's in the sort of an example of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the challenges in life are great, and usually the people that have the problems are not necessarily the lower people. It's very often the smart people.
Yeah.
Because you're smart, and now you think you're smarter than someone else, and you do it in another way. So that's why, I mean, a lot of times the people who you know, and look at the world today. Look at the world today. I mean, like, you know, it's like you got the people like, you know, Mark Zuckerberg is a very smart Jew.
Mm-hmm.
But he uses his smarts not in a way that's making the world a better place.
Well, he's using it for his benefit.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the difference when you were talking about, and I hate to go down a bunny trail, but when you were talking about, you know, the importance of knowing who you are and what's your purpose, that's big. Now, obviously, there is a divine purpose that we all should do, but there's an individual purpose, and it can only come from them analyzing themselves and say, how can I be of a service, not only to Hashem, but the people around
That's correct. But I want to explain one thing. Mark Zuckerberg believes he's being righteous.
Right.
He believes being righteous. Karl Marx believes being righteous. They're all believe they're being righteous. They think that their belief is they're making the world a better place in some way, shape. Everyone deludes themselves in that way.
But
Smart
it's through their
people,
own methods, not through
that's
the
right.
wisdom of Hashem.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And that's the problem.
That's it.
That really the problem is that they're looking at the system. And that's what I told you before, and I always tell you this. And the reason why I tell you this is because you need to understand that that there are the Jews that you need to hear from are the sages. The Jews that do not follow the Torah have a major problem. What's their major problem? The major problem is that they have a soul that has a high mission. And now they're not using the directive on how to access it. So they're making their own system. And by definition, it's going to be bad. It's going to look nice for a while. Communism, Bernie Sanders. I mean, I didn't want to get in today, but I think I do need to explain to you all a little bit my feelings about the Ukraine-Russia war. I don't know if I want to do it today, but I think I'll explain it to you because I've always hinted at it that I don't share the view of the mainstream of either party, because there's a big facade that's going on here.
I think we all.
Yeah, when I see
Zelensky,
a Jew who's calling out for this the Ukrainian thing, and I say, wait, you're an intermarried Jew, doesn't keep the Torah, and you got some kind of other trick you're doing here.
So are you saying simply?
I'll explain to you another time. I don't do it today, but another time a little bit what I see about that. I don't. Russia is not good, but they're both doing the same thing in different ways, and we're not seeing the sleight of hand. So whenever you see these guys with these great ideas, brilliant guys, the Zuckerbergs, the Bernie Sanders, I'm not accusing them of being, evil, all bad, because they probably think that they're doing a great thing, but they're not, and they can't be. And what they're saying is going to be, in the end, a complete destruction. It has to be. It has to be. And the reason, so that's why you answer your questions, right? It's a lot of times people that are talented and who believe they're doing right, but they're not accessing the Torah, and they're using the Torah. I mean, sometimes these people even quote. I know in the Jewish world, a lot of the not really religious Jews, some other sects of Judaism, that they quote things from the Torah, but it's a misquote. They don't understand it. Let's talk about today. Yes, there is the tremendous importance of chesed, of kindness. It's throughout the Torah. That is not the same thing as taking a person's money and redistributing it. It's not the same thing. Not the same thing. You have called tov sanah. And there is in the Torah the two kinds of charity, by the way. It's very fascinating. Two kinds of charity in the Torah. There is the charity that it's my money, and I give it to whoever I want to give it to. I have what's called tov sanah. It's me to give it to who I want to give it to. It's mine. There's another kind of charity that's called heya, shecha, and leket. It's this, when you had a field, poor people were allowed to take certain parts of your field. They were allowed to gather the corners of the field, any part of the field that was forgotten, or any part that was left over. You're not allowed to, in Jewish law, gather it for them and give it to them. They got to do it themselves, because that charity is not yours. That's God saying, I'm giving this. So there is that concept that there's a place where it's yours to give and a place where it's not really yours. But that's not for Karl Marx or Bernie Sanders to decide. Every time it works, I tell you, if you had a system, you want to blow money, give it to the government to create a system to help people. You will lose that money in 2 seconds through corruption and through everything else. You want to give to charity, give it to charity. I know many good real charities. I know people that are learning Torah on a high level. You can give them and support this and learning. My brother runs a charity in the old city. He only used volunteers. There is the old city of Jerusalem. Only he makes sure that it doesn't cost him anything to deliver the products he delivers to the people. He collects the money, all volunteers, and he goes and he buys the food for poor people and he gives it to them. He doesn't give them other money because he wants to, I want to make sure it goes for healthy food that I know they're getting. And he makes sure there's no overhead. You know, go to a charity, find out how much the fundraiser is pocketing. Now, again, I understand he has to take something. There's costs, but a real charity is a real charity.
Yeah, there is. We have this thing in the United States. It's a charity system. You can look up, see what their status is, see how much of their money is used for administration versus what they give. I'd be interested to know what the federal government's quote charity program, how much is admin and how much is going into bureaucracy.
Yeah,
how much getting in the hand of the widow that's out
but
there.
I think what Rabbi is trying to get across is, sadly, there's those out there that think war is good for the economy.
Of course.
Yeah, that's just so in the opposite direction of Torah, isn't it, Rabbi?
Yep, that's right. That's right. That is right. That is right. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And that's a little bit what I was trying to show you today with Nehemiah. I mean, the guys who are saying stuff, it's really, it's funny. I think that,
yeah.
Robert F. Kennedy is running for president. Other people follow this at all. Interesting thing. I don't think he's going to win. I'll tell you why I don't think he's going to win. There's only one leader ever in history that was not an orator. Who is the one leader in history who was not a good orator? You know who it is? Moshe. You know why he wasn't a good orator? So one commentary says because God didn't want the people would think that it's the messenger. It's got a good delivery. It's charismatic. It's the message. It's the message. Is the truth, and even the guy can't speak. He's an oral svasayim. He's a speech impediment, but the truth is the truth. Incredible. So I was listening to RFK, had a lot of really good points. Unfortunately, then when I heard him talk about abortion, I was like, okay, your message is not the pure message. It's unfortunate. He had a lot of good points about what's going on in the government, and it's 100% true. Unfortunately, his message is what he's trying to do is trying to bring back America to the Democratic Party of the 60s, which is good. Go back 20 years, 40 years, 50 years, how bad things have gotten. But it's not the message. It's not the message, unfortunately. But the points that he's saying about the corruption, you listen to it and you're like, whoa, wow. Person in charge, he said this, I don't know if you heard this. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, was being guided and run by the same person who was guiding and running Monsanto's, the company that is funding the toxic poisons in it's incredible. So that's the point. The point is that that's right. That's right. And then they have you talking about climate change, what I told you last week. Don't worry, the world's going to last. Mashiach will be here before anything's going to happen to the whole world. Don't worry. But the fact they're poisoning your water, poisoning your plants, poisoning all these things, DeSantis, I like DeSantis. As a candidate. I like DeSantis. I don't know if he'll win because my brother's got a theory. I hope my brother's wrong. My brother, I hope he's wrong on this, because if my brother's right in this, then the deep state is so deep it's frightening. My brother believes, and it could be true, that everyone knows when they're persecuting Trump, it's making him more popular. Everyone knows that's happening. His lead keeps going up because they persecute him. So the question is, are the people that are persecuting him doing that on purpose? So he'll be the nominee? If they're that manipulative, that's scary. That's scary. I don't know. I
don't think they can help themselves. That's why.
That's a simple thing. But it could be
they operate out of their yetzer so much they can't help it. It just comes.
It could be. It could be. But I think it's a problem. It's a big problem. So DeSantis, as a politician, again, politicians are politicians. Don't believe these guys. Don't believe those guys. But DeSantis, the advantage of DeSantis over Trump is, in my opinion, is that DeSantis is a calibrated person. They're gonna once if he wins the nomination, they'll call him a Nazi. They'll call him Hitler.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say, if you think they're going to go easy on him because he's smooth,
no, they won't. They won't.
That ain't gonna happen.
But he won't give him as much
Right.
fodder as Trump gives him.
Right.
Trump gives him fodder, and that's why people like Trump, because he's like, I'm taking the gloves off already. The gloves are off, and that's the one thing that Trump did negatively, which was that the world was pretending in a certain way. And Trump then said, okay, I'm not pretending anymore. This is baloney. And when he took the gloves off, that created that they said, okay, so now we're going to go. Now all the kindness and the pseudo phony, externalities was gone. And then they started calling, so now the gloves are all off. And now they're justified because he's a Nazi. So it just made America more of an angry place because he called him out on the stuff, which had to be done. But we'll see. I'm going to ask a question that I like an answer from people, because this is really I'm just curious. When somebody says something's the big lie, you got to wonder, like, yeah, you a liar yourself. I like to get an answer from people. Just maybe Rod could count the numbers here. How many people at this point do trust the electoral system? How many people feel confident in the electoral system when they vote in 2024? They feel confident that whatever the voting is going to be truthful. Can I get a show of hands, yes or no? Rod, are we more than are we?
I honestly, I see just about. I don't see Stephen or Cheyenne. I haven't seen. Oh no, Cheyenne said thumbs down. Laura, I'm sorry.
Not.
Thumbs down. Yeah.
Not say thumbs down.
So it's
You
a
what,
serious.
Cheyenne.
I said I did not do thumbs down. I'm just in the car, so I don't have my camera on.
Oh, okay, I misread.
Two
his
thumbs
heart.
down.
Yeah, so I think most of us here would feel.
Yeah.
that.
I it's just a fascinating thing, because if half the country does not trust the voter integrity, that's a serious problem.
Yeah, even if it's not true, let's just say they have complete voter integrity, but people are going in. It brings instability to the psyche of a country. Yeah.
Yeah, big problem.
Yeah,
Right. But the good news is, whatever they do,
it does.
whatever they try, Hashem runs the world, and it's going exactly where it has to go. In the end, I told you many times, the Ramchal is an amazing thing. The greatest understanding of God, you're going to be able to see of God's oneness, is when everything you think was people controlling it was all playing into the plan that God had all along.
Absolutely, I agree with
No
you.
one else controlling anything. Don't get nervous.
100%. Yeah.
That's what gives
sure.
Right,
us
everyone.
peace. Shalom,
That's
shalom,
right.
guys. We'll see you.
All the
Don't
best.
forget, no class on Tuesday night. No class Tuesday night.
Take care.
Shalom, guys.
Rod, have a wonderful week.
You
nice
too,
to see
Dan.
all you guys down there in Texas and in the States.
Yeah, it's good to
So that's
see
going to
you.
be our Working Together series for today. Thank you so much, Rabbi Ingber, for the beautiful message, and we look forward to hearing more. So till next week, have a wonderful, wonderful week, everybody. Bye for now.